Hello, my name is JP Batra. I'm an interim CTO and a technology leader. On my assignments, I use a combination of emerging and conventional technologies to drive enterprise agility, corporate growth, open new markets, and keep companies relevant in a highly disruptive environment like the one we are facing today. The topic of my presentation is Digital First Digital Transformation. Digital transformation is a way, a process, a methodology by which companies transform their business models from the conventional ways of doing business to being digitally first, or engaging with the customers on digital platforms, from online presence to online billing to social media. It's digital first is the mindset that transforms from the conventional ways of doing business. Let's look at why that need even arose. Let's look at the digital evolution. In late 1990s and early 2000s, an interesting phenomenon started happening. A series of digitally native companies were born. Amazon.com, trying to sell books online, and then Barnes & Noble, which also embarked on selling books online, and a bunch of other digitally native companies. These were companies that were cloud-born, they were cloud native from day one. And they had adopted digital technologies from day one, from agile methodologies, agile processes to mobile applications. And they were launching products at an incremental but a very rapid pace, which is what agile methodologies allows one to do. Large companies looked at this revolution, digital revolution, and watched what would happen. All of these companies that I named were startups, but pretty soon something very interesting started to emerge. They started not only growing, but they started thriving, and their growth curves started looking like the way you see for Google. You can transpose this kind of a model onto other companies as well. And of course, large corporations were not going to sit back. They knew that they were not digitally native companies. They knew that with those kind of large organizations, it was not very easy to transform to behave like a digitally native companies. But they embarked on portions of digital transformation. They started introducing digital technologies around the same time at select places. For example, a retailer went ahead and started putting online presence and uploading inventory there. And the intent was still to engage the customer on digital channels, but still drive towards the conventional way of doing business, which is foot traffic into the store. But they benefited from even those kind of changes. Here's an example of three large companies here, and their growth curve from 1960s all the way to 17 and 18s. And as the red color represents for these three large companies, and you can again mentally extrapolate this to any other large company or the ones that did successfully and are still around, same kind of a growth curve. The reds show the standard growth trend line. And remember, it's the 2000s or so when the digital revolution really took off. Around that time, you can also see how their growth curve started going up. And it all started happening in addition to other factors, which would be a constant, like the growth in economy and customers started buying more. In addition to all of that, it was the digital introduction that made an impact for them. Then there was this third class of companies that totally ignored the digital strategy altogether. And I represent these companies with a rusted trailer because they were so far behind. They did not realize that the erosion of their markets was happening due to digital. They attributed the decline in sales or stagnation of their markets to global economies, the economic conditions and others, which were true, but there was a digital element missing from their thinking. And of course, their economic growth was stalled. It wasn't as drastically going downwards like the way I've shown here. But it gets the point across that they didn't realize that digital was the way of the future, and the customer preferences was being shifted, A, because they could see that the digital journey was a little bit frictionless, and B, because they were beginning to get used to those consumer habits of buying from Amazon, buying from online retailers, streaming media through Netflix and the other digitally native companies. Then around 2015, 16 onwards, a disruption happened, and that was emerging technologies. Artificial intelligence took root. IoT started making big inroads, and those started disrupting even the conventional businesses that had not gone digital, and that was a huge impact on their business. If this wasn't enough, the current pandemic literally put brakes onto the way they were doing business, and at this point in time, going digital is the only way to do business. And to drive that point home, this has become a survival issue. It's no longer a choice. Companies have to go digital because at this point in time, almost everybody's used to transacting digitally, even large companies. Let's look at an IDC report which shows that 53% of the worldwide spending by 2023 would be on digital transformation. That's almost half of the IT budget, technology budget. US share is $2.3 trillion. So now you can imagine if it is $2.3 trillion in expenditure on digital transformation, it's pretty much dawned onto a lot of companies that this is the way of the future. For the ones who are still not convinced, the growth rate into digital transformation is 17.1%. And based on different levels of digital maturity that a company has, which means how much of digital transformation do they understand, how to engage with the customers online do they understand, based on their maturity level, it will take them as long to catch up to their competition, and then to be able to do even business in today's environment. And that's a tall order. If this wasn't enough, look at the S&P 500 company tenure. In 1958, in those conventional ways of doing business, it used a S&P 500 company stayed an S&P 5 company for 61 years in a row. By 2011, which means about 11 years had gone into digital revolution, that lead had cut down to 18 years. Every 18 years, an S&P 500 company was being replaced with another one. And then at this point in time, every few weeks, a company gets replaced out of the S&P 500 basket. So even large companies are not immune from the disruption due to emerging tech and from the digital revolution that's going on, which has accelerated due to pandemic. Therefore, being digital is no longer the domain of digitally native companies. And one of the biggest things that these companies are striving for through digital transformation is closing the gap between how they deliver value to the customers conventionally versus what the customer expects. And I will elaborate on this a little later on because I'll make it real for you. And if that wasn't enough, if the external threats were not enough, there's internal threats too. If a person is not able to operate rapidly inside a company, if they are still experiencing bloated processes to launch their projects, and you probably have witnessed some of that too. You might have thought that I can launch this project much faster than the way I'm going today. Then you have a propensity to leave that organization. So the threat is both internal and external. All right, so now let's look at what digital transformation really means. The following quote sums it up quite very well. There's so many wide variety of digital transformation definitions out there in the market that it's important to understand what transformation even means, or rather what digital transformation means that leads to digital first mindset or digital first transform business model. Because unless that piece is very well understood, a game plan to go digital might end up being only incrementally digital, which I'll also present through an example. And that may make an impact on your company, but it may not necessarily produce the results what you're after. We talked about this, several definitions exist. This is a place where I'll spend a little bit of time explaining the distinction between the two models, a digitally transformed company and a company that has introduced digital incrementally. Let's take the example of a grocery store, which is now beginning to sell groceries online. Even before the pandemic, many of the grocery stores' business model used to be getting the foot traffic into the door, and everything they launched to improve the convenience of the customer, like digitally clippable coupons or like a self-service checkout, instead of waiting in long lines at the digital at the checkout lines. All of those were still aimed at one thing: get the foot into the door, get you into the door of their stores. So that's a non-transformed business model where digital increments have been applied to improve your experience, but it is not fully transformed as yet. So that's one piece. Now let's look at a fully transformed digital model. In a fully transformed digital model today, especially in this post-pandemic, in this pandemic period, I, as a consumer, can shop groceries online. I can look at every single piece of inventory that's out there. I can pick and choose the amount of food that I want to buy, the products that I want to buy. I can put in notes saying that I want substitute for this. I can also even put in notes saying what kind of produce do I want. For example, let's say I got too much fruits in my at my home, but I'm interested in buying bananas. I may put in a note saying that, hey, buy me some green bananas instead of a fully ripe bananas, because I know that when it comes home, I will leave it on my shelves and it will ripen by the time I would have finished my other fruits that I have at my home. So I can do all of those things. Once I'm done, I can go to the checkout cart, pay through the credit card, and I'm done. And then the online grocers is then going to give me a choice. Do I want to come to the store and pick it up? Which means I go to the parking lot, call in a number, and somebody will come out and deliver groceries into my car. Or do I want the groceries to be delivered at a nominal charge or no charge if the amount of purchase exceeds a particular amount? And this is a transformed business model where the grocery store is no longer saying everything I do is with the intent of bringing the foot traffic into my door, but it's saying, let me serve you online and digitally as much as possible so that you do not have to come to the store. And of course, their older model is not gone. If somebody is still interested in foot traffic and they want to go and shop inside, especially with this reduced number of people in the store, they can do so. So this is the one which is transformative. The business model has shifted from foot traffic to online. And you can now that the business model has shifted, you can also clearly see how the old model that we were all used to so much for decades is full of friction. For example, you've gone to work, you're driving home, you have to stop at a grocery store. Well, guess what? So is everybody else doing the same thing too. And then you have to park your car, go inside, find a cart, and you go to the shelf and find that the stuff is not on the shelf anymore. So then you come to the checkout lines and there's this long lines. You go to the self-service checkout and there's long lines there too, because the store has reduced the number of grocery checkout counters. So it's full of friction, whereas online, all of these things, including even knowing whether the product is available or not, or whether I can ask for a substitution or not, is all taken care of. And very beautifully, the operational processes are transformed too. Look at it this way. Invoicing, billing, credit back, giving you credit for the produce that may not be available even though it shows available inside the grocery store, giving you a refund just in case something bad was delivered to you, and then somebody coming out to your car to put the groceries in the trunk of your car, which is a manual process, or somebody from the grocery store driving to your home and delivering it at your doorstep. That's a manual process too. So it's a perfect integration of digital and manual processes, where once again, in the earlier model of digital coupons and self-service checkout, the business model had not changed. It was still foot traffic with the intent of improving your customer experience. Whereas in the transformed business model, the intent is, let me serve you online as much as possible through digital platforms, and you don't have to come to the store. That is definitely a very big key distinction that can make or break a company's position in the market. And I just wanted to spend enough time to drive that point home. Other thing is, guesswork is taken out from the entire model that I just described due to analytics, machine learning, business intelligence, historical data processing. It takes emotions out of the equation. By using agile processes and agile methodologies, you've taken the guesswork out of the equation too, and you're launching the products incrementally. And I'll give you an example of that as well. So the speed to market has increased. So in this consumer experience that I just talked about, I have also noticed that during the early pandemic days, When I used to shop online, every single time I went online again for a second round of shopping or third round of shopping, I would have to redo the entire grocery cart all over again. Whereas people have a tendency of buying similar things over and over again. If I bought bananas last time, most likely I want to buy bananas again this time too. So I myself witnessed a change that during early pandemic I had to redo the grocery cart all over again. But now when I log in, the previous cart is already preloaded for me, and all I need to do is adjust the quantity or take out certain items that I'm no longer interested in and replace it with something else. That's the agility we are talking about, where a transformed business actually anticipates customer needs instead of waiting for the requirements. That's another key distinction in a digitally transformed world, and then continuously test it out. What do you think my reaction was when I saw that my cart loaded by itself very quickly? I liked it, right? But until they did it for me, this was simply a thought in my mind that wish they would upload the previous cart itself. I didn't have to give them feedback. They figured it out. So that incremental launch of the products on an ongoing basis, and then applying analytics and machine learning and those kind of tools, definitely makes a huge difference. It makes a huge difference in taking the guesswork out of the product launches. It also is a radical departure from the old ways of doing business, when a product was conceived, decided, launched, and I'm sure you're all familiar with the many of the product lines that failed, that did not work at all. Whereas in this digitally transformed world, with agile methodologies and other kind of approaches, you get an immediate feedback and you can react and respond very, very quickly to your customer needs. And I as a consumer have omni-channel experience. I could interact with the grocery store in person. I can go inside. I can have groceries delivered. I can shop online. I can make a phone call to them. They're firing on all the cylinders across all the channels that I'm interested in. And the end result is, which is what the digital transformation definition I put forward for you earlier, how the value is delivered to the customer has transformed, and so has the business model. Both of them have transformed. And if you recall the previous slide where I had talked about the companies that are going digital are trying to close the gap between how they deliver value to the customer versus what a digital customer needs, this is what it means. All right, so now let's also look at who leads the charge. The CEO leads the charge, and CIOs have a perfect opportunity to move from keep the lights on, keep the operations running, IT operations running, to actually being a key driver of innovation, looking at what the CEO says as the transformed business model is, and then being able to support that. So for IT and technology leaders, this is a perfect opportunity to make your mark in helping with digital transformation. What it is not? A fragmented customer journey. If my journey in this entire cart experience keeps on breaking over and over again, for example, let's say the credit card was not integrated very well with the shopping cart, was not integrated very well with what's inside the store, if it was not integrated with what's displayed online, and I keep finding that what I shopped for was not available, and I keep getting credit back for that, or if I had to make repeated call to say that there's an error in billing, that's full of friction. So fragmented customer journey is not digital transformation. Incremental to no changes is not digital transformation. For example, just doing digital coupons by itself made an impact, but it's not digital transformation. It definitely helped. Cloud adoption. So I've done a fair amount of digital transformation projects by now. In one particular case, I helped a money transfer company transform their business models from agent-based money transfer to online money transfer. And the intent of this company was not to get rid of the agent-based network, but was to improve the online traffic at places where people were more digitally savvy, because this company also transacts very heavily into third world countries. I think you know which company I'm speaking about. And it worked well, 22% change in traffic, and there was new products deployed into the cloud. Another example, it was a question of converting paper-based processes into end-to-end digital experience for a B2B company in construction industry, and that company got acquired. But as I journeyed through the digital transformation work, one of the things that I've noticed is that somehow for many companies there's a notion that if they went to the cloud, then they have digitally transformed. This is not true. It definitely removes a lot of friction by going to the cloud, but it does not necessarily mean that that the companies have transformed. A transformed business model which gives an end-to-end seamless digital experience to the customer and integrates any manual processes if there are, like in the grocery store example, that is digital transformation. Companies that are still following their old way of bloated processes and large, big intake processes and bureaucratic ways of doing things means that there's low agility. Therefore, that's not digital transformation either, because they cannot react and respond very quickly, like the way the grocery store example where I gave you, where the next time I went to the shopping cart, I saw that my groceries were already preloaded. My previous shopping was preloaded, and all I needed to do was remove things that I was not interested in. The net effect is that the digital customer does not feel that there's much change. And the whole point of digital transformation is to keep companies competitive and relevant. Therefore, this has again become a survival issue for companies that are not fully transformed. Now, I wanted to share with you briefly also what kind of things are roadblocks, because that's part of my presentation where I did talk about why certain digital transformations do not work and what can be done to knock out those issues. Here is a very rough sketch. It's not accurate. It's just trying to get a point across here, where an IT organization is very siloed, is totally functionally oriented, and there's individual teams. There are systems that may not be talking to each other. Then with the keep the lights on kind of a mindset, there are some legacy systems where the data journey between different systems does not happen. And therefore, the company and the business is unable to move or flow the data from one end to the other very effectively. Real-time insights and actions would be lacking just because it's all fragmented. Predictive analysis would be a notion in the future someday. Keep guessing. And non-integrated systems make for a very weak IT, and data from disparate sources, especially some proprietary ways of doing things, they do not connect with each other. So these kind of systems. Now, if you were to project the same kind of mindset instead of just an IT organization to an entire business where all those functional business units, the finance, the HR, everybody operates in their own world, has their own kind of systems, that compounds the problem even more. And these are the companies that have not transformed the business model, and therefore it's very hard for them to start acting like a digitally native companies. And that's the point I wanted to drive home here. And then if there was a merger and acquisition that happened, now you're straddled with integrating the other company's business and systems into your company's business and system as well. So those are the early roadblocks that impede digital transformation. But once again, as we saw in the first or second slide where we talked about the big companies reacting, a proper planning can definitely help companies migrate their IT organizations from the conventional ways of doing business to keep introducing agile processes and agile ways of doing things, and play a game of attrition where the legacy systems can be removed one by one, and therefore it's transformation. It's an evolution, not a revolution. However, speed is still important. Evolution doesn't mean forever. The second part of the equation, I have this slated as the classic people process technology example, of which the people aspect is the most important. In the people aspect, leadership and culture in a digital transformation, especially when a company is trying to break away from the old ways of doing business to the new ways of a transformed digital mindset, that is a huge leap and not easy to do. As I mentioned earlier, it's an evolution, even though it might be a rapid evolution, but not a revolution. Any company that tries to go revolution is again going to fail. Agile mindset, self-organizing teams, employee mobility, enabled workforce. I remember a very recent digital transformation experience where I worked for that company. I worked with them on digital transformation enablement for 6 quarters in a row. And in this particular case, a 40,000 some people company with worldwide footprint, multiple countries footprint, in this case, the CEO, the CTO, the CIO, the Chief Product Officer, all the C-suite was early on aligned. The senior executives were early on aligned that digital first is the future and we have to go digital. And they then started propagating that message top down, left, right in every single way. We are talking about an omni-channel experience for a customer. This company very well understood that if they wanted to be omni-channel for the external customer, they might as well start their journey internally with their own employees. So the messaging came in form of town halls. Messaging came in form of memos. Messaging came in forms of TV-based streaming. Messaging came in the form of training left, right, up, down across the entire organization. Not one department was left aside. And it was quite an investment. It was quite a leap of faith also to break away from the old ways of doing business into the new world. It was a brave move. And it took few quarters of planning that way and training that way and messaging that way before they even embarked on it. So once that groundwork was laid out very effectively, then the leadership kept on demonstrating that they were totally bought into it through constant messaging, through constant conversation. Even the middle management were talking in terms of agile approaches. The self-forming teams were organized, agile methodologies were adopted, waterfall was being dropped off very rapidly, and the company started engaging in a digital way internally so that they could launch projects in a very, very different fashion altogether. And I do remember the first quarter that I represented one department in the first quarterly meeting where multiple leaders were meeting together, including staff, to design the workflows for the subsequent quarter and what they would do on a bi-weekly sprint basis. It was total chaos. Things were almost everybody felt like this was a pure wastage of time. It was not going to work at all. But the company leaders persisted. They kept on saying, we knew, we anticipated this could happen. Let's keep going. Second quarter rolls around. This time the chaos was less. People were beginning to have a better notion on how to operate. Third quarter rolled around, and by this time everybody knew what to do. And the projects were already beginning to come out in an agile fashion, and that impact was visible to the customers too. And on it went. So basically this company was able to do the digital transformation very effectively, and that's the level of commitment that's needed. Now let's contrast this with a very conventional way of doing business, and I'm sure you can relate to this. How many times have you seen a memo that comes out from the senior leaders and then everybody else holds a meeting or two about the changes that need to happen, and then nobody does anything about it? For the brave few who try to embark on it, they get shot down very quickly. Next time another memo that comes out saying we need to compete effectively in the market, we need to do digital transformation, and your head goes, I've seen this before. And you look at it with a sense of skepticism, or you may even joke about it, or sometimes some people even joke about it as, yeah, that's a management memo. So that is one way to fail it. But this way, the one that I just talked about earlier, in how committed the company was and was firing on all cylinders internally, is what made an external revolution happen. Process, lean processes, agile processes, for example, going from waterfall to DevOps and then baking in security into the DevOps world to make it DevSecOps, that's the transformation we are talking about. Lean processes don't apply only to application development, it applies to the entire organization as well. For example, the conventional way of prioritization used to be, well, here's our business focus, foot traffic into the door. Here's already projects that were launched earlier. Now, what else do we need to do? We need to launch digital coupons. And then you create additional projects, you provide funding to the company, and off you go, the conventional way of doing business. A digital transform world, well, we are going to engage the customer along the digital front. What would the workflows look like? What is the value stream mapping, which means from the beginning portion all the way to from finance department operations, what is the entire workflow that needs to transform? We are going to fund that one, the low-hanging fruit first. This is the kind of lean processes that knocks out friction from the process kind of an approach that's very important. And then, of course, converting paper-based to online is very important too. Automation is another one. Let's take the routine, repetitive things out of the mix, because what's more important is to free up those resources and have them engage on being more productive elsewhere. Maybe we want to retrain and reskill them into something else. Technology, digital technology integration at right place, doing it the right way is as important as just doing digital technologies to begin with anyway. Second thing, something that I've noticed in my experience is that the new technologies, the artificial intelligence, IoT, blockchain, IoT not as much, but AI and blockchain, the power of what they can do and where they are most applicable, in my experience, is just beginning to get understood at this point in time. It was not very well understood. So anybody who's introducing these technologies need to think about the use case and need to ask a question: what if I don't use AI? Can I still be whole? And if you can be, then if you decide to use AI, you're just doing it for the sake of introducing a new technology. So be very careful, in my opinion, in how you introduce new technologies. You should always be asking the question, can I do it without this technology? Would I get the information I need using conventional means? That's important. Legacy replacement is important. And of course, knocking down silos is as important as anything else. The final piece that I saved, another best one for the last, innovation. The new technology departments are highly innovative. Innovation does not necessarily mean emerging technologies only. Innovation means looking at new ways of doing business, how to accelerate what you're doing, how to deploy products into a marketplace fast, and of course, creating new products that will give a competitive advantage to the business versus just compete okay in the business. That's what innovation would be all about. And innovation is a constant. It's no longer one-time thing that needs to be done. Let's come back to the roadblocks. We use IT's rough sketch as an example, then we transposed it to entire business of a company. And let's look at a few more. Again, this time on people, process, technologies. If a company's leadership is not very committed to digital transformation and does in a lackluster way, well, then that would become that memo-like example that I talked about earlier. People will spot it. Middle management and the VPs and directors would not be convinced or committed. Nobody is going to make that happen. Second thing is unclear on customer needs. Now remember, this is a world, digital transformation is a world where, sure, you are maintaining the contact with the same customer, but engaging with them in a different way. But and this is also a place where the customer is not going to give you the needs because they themselves are in the dark, relatively dark, on how to conduct business online with you. Therefore, there's a leap of faith that needs to happen, supplemented by the analytics and machine learning and real-time data and agile methodologies, so that you can test, deploy, fail forward fast, deploy again, and keep going. But unclear on where you want to take the customer, unclear outcomes, failed digital transformation. Going too fast, if the company is a laggard and has suddenly decided, let's put in a ton of money across all sides, bring emerging technologies, put agile methodologies, go to value stream mapping versus conventional ways of doing things. If it just goes a big bang theory, is going to fail. And then the most important piece is that few types of people will block the progress in a digital transformation too. People who are lone rangers. Well, they keep everything to their chest, whereas in a digitally transformed world, information flows freely, top down, left, right, across multiple levels, VPs to directors to staff, they can all interact with each other very effectively and very quickly. There is no hierarchy anymore. So people who are lone rangers will make it fail. People who are old timers, that does not mean older people. Old timers just means that people who have been in this company for a few years, 10 years, 12 years, 15 years, and are used to doing one way of doing things. They may not like the digital transformation, especially if they are in middle management at times, because they're about to lose the control over their staff. Well, not truly, but they perceive it that way. Control is not gone. It's just how they interact with their own staff changes. So that class of people is going to make things fail too. Process. If the change management is not applied, if people are not convinced to go digital, if they are not tied to the vision of the company, if the vision is not very well explained, if it isn't very well explained as to how this company is going to make an impact into the world, and it's not only going to survive but thrive by doing those things, it's going to fail. Operational agility is lacking. So you do application development in an agile way, you do some other business transformative work in an agile way, and when it comes down to the operations, like in the grocery store example, if all of your orders and the billing and the other systems are not integrated, good luck, it's going to fail. So these are high friction handoffs, silos that do not make for a very good transformation experiences. And on the technology side, if a CIO is still very committed to keep the lights on, they may have inherited old Stone Age systems that requires keep the lights on. That's different than a mindset of a CIO who wants to remain keep the lights on, right? A transformative CIO, even if they inherited the old kind of systems, is going to start transforming IT to start getting rid of the legacy systems. So KTL spend is still very high. Well, that's a roadblock to transformation. Innovation-driven products, if it is not fully supported, then I'm sure you're familiar with one of people who are enterprising in nature, want to learn something new, go and create a POC and create a product. But since operations and the other areas were not committed, were not party to that POC, it cannot integrate into the operational processes either. That fails. Data journey full of friction, we talked about that earlier. And lack of expertise, this is another thing that haunts technology people a lot. Technology changes very fast. And if people are not retrained and don't keep on upskilling, it's a roadblock to digital transformation. So e-learning and so many other e-learning platforms that are in existence, companies take subscriptions to that so that everybody can improve their skill sets. So how do you remove the barriers? What stops you? Well, look at the opportunity. Look at that workflow. Look at the value stream mapping that we talked about. Look at if you go digital, if you transform your business model to a digital model, how will things look like? And in that case, you map out multiple work streams, you prioritize those work streams, and you say, okay, I'm going to fund the most significant one, launch into the market, use fast feedback, fail forward fast, make those incremental improvements, and keep marching forward until my company is entirely digitally transformed in how it engages the customers on digital front. So that's the opportunity. Identify the opportunities effectively. Second thing is do a controlled introduction. What this means is, again, smaller increments, fail forward fast, improve, and then move on to the next, and then to the next, and to the next. It's a very disciplined, controlled, move forward kind of a thing. Master one part of the business and then switch over to the next one. An example would be that of the Amazon.com that we talked about earlier. Initially, it started as a bookseller, and then it started integrating other businesses once it figured out how to do that effectively. That's the kind of transformation we are talking about in removing barriers from the digital transformation. And third one comes right back to the people, process, and technologies. People. If people are not constantly being retrained, if people aren't allowed to move from one project to another, not in a willy-nilly free form kind of factor, but this one particular kind of skill set, but they're interested in moving over to another department, well, they can enhance and improve their skill set and go and work elsewhere. Or they do not have to report in a totally hierarchical fashion. If they want to interact with a VP on a project, they can interact with a VP, even if they are a software programmer. So that kind of train, upskill, repurpose, and retain is important, because in a digitally transformed world, domain knowledge becomes very, very important. Even though information is flowing freely, but the subtleties and nuances of how the business works gets built in, and it's very, very important to pay attention to that. Therefore, employees become a gold mine for success. And that's why I listed one of the most important one as the last, that this is the key to digital transformation success. So that's how you remove barriers. You got to make full commitment that you are going digital. You need to evaluate the digital models very, very effectively. And then you need to do a controlled, disciplined launch across the board and keep retraining and retaining your employees along the way. Definitely, there might be some who may not want to play ball, and they can easily replace, or they can be given an opportunity to upskill, or they can be replaced. So in conclusion, digital first has become a requirement. It's no longer an option. The pandemic accelerated the need for being digital first, because now everybody is digitally transacting on a digital front, or predominantly along digital front. It's no longer the domain of digitally native companies. And digital transformation is a path or a way or a method to make companies go digital first. So it's not a big bang theory, it's an evolution, not a revolution. We talked about that earlier. And one of the most important things that I also wanted to discuss here is that the journey does not stop. Innovation, disruption, cloud, and newer ways of business models, especially in a digitally transformed world, the customer is no longer bringing requirements to you, or they are bringing requirements to you in a fragmented crowdsourcing way. For example, they're talking about what a nice to have would be on social media platforms, and you need to listen on those channels. Or they might be responding through the complaints to your organization. Hey, I had bad food delivered to me and I did not get a credit back. That's where the requirements come from, and an intelligent company is going to process all of that information using smart analytics, and is going to be able to decide, if I did this, then I know that the customer is going to engage with me better. And then they make that incremental change, and if it does not work, roll it back. In other words, fail forward fast and recover and launch something else. These are the key to digital transformation successes. So in summary, the revolution that started, digital revolution that started in the late 1990s, early 2000s, those digitally native companies, the trailblazers, pretty much set the pace for the rest of the world to follow suit. In conclusion, it's not only the big companies. Big companies are not immune from digital revolution either. You saw what happened to the S&P 500 companies and how quickly they're getting replaced with some other companies. And it is always possible for any company to decide to go digital first. They just need to start the journey. As long as they've started the journey, and as long as the customers are informed about it, they will succeed. It's not like they will be totally booted out of competition altogether. So with that said, once again, I'm JP Batra. If there are any follow-up questions, or if you want to discuss some more about digital transformation and some of the things that you might have embarked on where you may need to talk it out with me, feel free to reach out to me. My contact information is as you see here. And with that, I'm at the end of my presentation. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your attention.